The sun had just dipped below the red cliffs of southern Utah when a park ranger noticed something strange. A single tent, zipped closed, sat motionless in a remote campground of Fish Lake National Forest. There was no fire burning, no signs of food preparation, no sound. It was as if the campsite had been paused mid-use. He made a note to return the next day, assuming the hikers were off exploring a nearby trail. But when he came back, the tent was exactly the same, and inside what he found made the hairs on his neck stand up. 4 sleeping bags laid out neatly, all unoccupied. Backpacks with phones and wallets still zipped inside. Hiking boots tucked beside each sleeping bag. Nothing was missing, except the 4 young campers who had signed into the check-in log just 2 days earlier. Their names were Ethan, Kyle, Harper, and Sierra. 2 boys, 2 girls, all in their mid-20s, close friends from college. They had planned this trip for over a year, choosing Utah for its remote beauty and promise of solitude. What none of them could have predicted was that their disappearance would trigger one of the most baffling missing persons cases in the state's history. When their families hadn't heard from them by the expected date, police were notified. By the time the first search team arrived, nothing had changed in the tent. It looked like a scene from a movie, untouched, eerie, and deeply unsettling. Investigators began with the obvious. They combed the nearby trails, used helicopters and drones, sent dogs into the ravines. But there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, no prints outside the tent, just perfectly preserved gear. Then came the first chilling detail. A local man reported hearing distant screams the night before the ranger first saw the tent. He'd dismissed it at the time, thinking it was wildlife or maybe an echo bouncing off the cliffs. Now, he wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, the media got wind of the story. 4 vanish in Utah backcountry, one headline read. Mysterious tent discovery baffles police, said another. Reporters flocked to the area, but were kept back by forest patrols. What they didn't see, and what police chose not to release at first, was what lay buried under the surface. A ranger, while walking half a mile from the campsite, stumbled upon a stack of rocks that looked oddly arranged. Beneath them, buried carefully, was a torn notebook. It was damp but legible. Inside were scattered notes written by Harper, one of the missing girls. The entries became increasingly disjointed and frantic, referencing strange sounds at night, flickering lights between the trees, and a growing sense that they were being watched. Ethan doesn't sleep anymore, one entry read. We hear things we can't explain. Last night we saw someone, or something, by the creek. That line made detectives pause. The creek was more than a mile from the tent, surrounded by steep ravines. It would have been nearly impossible to reach in the dark without gear. And yet, they had gone. The next few entries hinted at paranoia. We can't leave. The map's wrong. It keeps changing. And finally, if someone finds this, tell my parents I love them. Something is out here. We don't know what it wants. The public never saw these pages. They were kept locked in the evidence room for fear of fueling panic or conspiracy. But among the search team, there was a growing feeling that this wasn't a normal missing persons case. As one officer put it, people don't just vanish like that, not all 4, not without a trace. And still, the tent remained. A monument to a moment frozen in time, the zipper untouched, the food still sealed. As if the campers had simply stepped out and never returned. When the forensic team examined the tent, they noticed an unusual detail that had initially gone unnoticed. Inside one of the sleeping bags, buried deep beneath the lining, they found a strand of long red hair, far longer and redder than any belonging to the missing campers. Harper had brown curls, Sierra had short blonde waves, and both Ethan and Kyle had dark, cropped hair. This strand was vibrant, coppery, and at least 12 inches long. It was dry, clean, and recently shed. More unsettling was the fact that there were no signs of anyone else entering the tent. No footprints, no drag marks, no blood. It was as if the strand had been left there deliberately. The discovery was kept quiet from the public, but within the investigative team, theories began to spiral. Could there have been someone living off the grid nearby? A hermit, a hunter, or worse, someone who preys on campers? Meanwhile, Sierra's father, a retired military survivalist, flew in from Arizona to join the search. He refused to believe they were simply lost. He told reporters, "My daughter could survive anything, but even she wouldn't have walked off into that wilderness without her boots or gear." His presence brought pressure, and media coverage intensified. Satellite imaging was requested by federal authorities. Dozens of photographs were pored over. Nothing. It wasn't until an off-duty ranger reviewed older security cam footage from a check-in station 10 miles south that something finally clicked. The campers had passed through the station together on their way to the trailhead, laughing, arms around each other, the car filled with snacks and gear. But 30 minutes later, the camera picked up a second car. Same make, same model, same color, just one person inside. The license plate was partially obscured by dust. The driver wore a hoodie and sunglasses. They appeared to be alone. The car followed the same route. Investigators initially dismissed it as coincidence until they cross-checked rental records. Only one silver SUV had been rented by the group. So who was driving the second one? A look-alike vehicle that had no traceable plate, no registration, and no clear identity. Suddenly, everything shifted. Theories of accidents or misnavigation gave way to darker possibilities. Could the campers have been followed? Was this a premeditated stalking? Who would go to the trouble of mimicking a rental car and tailing it into a remote forest? That week, a new piece of evidence emerged. A hiker, unaware of the ongoing investigation, posted a photo to social media. He'd been backpacking 3 days prior through a ridge 2 miles east of the abandoned tent. In the background of his selfie, obscured by trees, was a small figure, almost imperceptible, standing just beyond a tree line. Zooming in revealed a person in a dark hood, standing perfectly still, watching. The authorities were alerted, and the man was questioned. He hadn't noticed the figure when taking the photo. The timestamp matched the night after the campers were last seen. The figure's position aligned with the creek, right where Harper's Journal had described the strange presence. Investigators returned to that area in force. They found a series of stacked stones arranged in a deliberate pattern, circles, crosses, and arrows. It was either a signal or a warning. Beneath one stack, they uncovered a plastic container sealed with duct tape. Inside were 5 Polaroid photographs, blurry, unnerving, but clear enough to make out shapes. In one, a sleeping bag unzipped. In another, a close-up of Kyle's face, eyes closed, peaceful, unaware. The rest were dark, distorted, almost abstract, but human outlines were visible. One photograph had writing scrawled on the back. They came to the forest. The forest called them. No fingerprints were found, no DNA, no trace of who had taken them. But from that moment on, the case was no longer classified as a missing persons report. It had become a criminal investigation, and the tent remained untouched. The photographs changed everything. They weren't just eerie, they were a violation. Proof that someone had been near the campers, watching, documenting, and yet no one had reported seeing anyone else in that area. Investigators revisited every vehicle that entered the park during the time frame. License plate logs, credit card records, ranger logs, nothing stood out. Whoever had been there either knew how to remain invisible or wasn't supposed to be on the grid in the first place. The forensic lab tried to enhance the photos further. While the image quality was poor, one detail emerged, a faint symbol in the corner of the last photo, scratched into a tree trunk. It resembled a spiral inside a triangle. Detectives began searching for similar symbols across past unsolved cases. That's when they stumbled upon an old report from 1997, 22 miles south of the current location. A family of 4 had gone missing during a weekend camping trip. Only their dog was found, scratching at the door of a ranger station 3 days later. Their campsite had been neat, undisturbed, much like the abandoned tent of the 4 friends. In a tree near that site, the same spiral triangle. Back then, the symbol had been dismissed as graffiti. Now, it was a chilling connection. Sierra's father, now embedded with the search team, demanded a deeper investigation. He began mapping all reported disappearances in the region for the last 30 years. The result sent a chill down every spine in the room. The missing persons cases formed a rough ring, encircling a section of national forest land that was notoriously difficult to access. Very few trails led in, no roads, dense with trees, cliffs, and old mining caves. Locals called it Dead Hollow, a place avoided even by seasoned rangers. Stories circulated for decades, strange howls, flickering lights, voices in the trees. The FBI, now involved, launched a covert operation to explore Dead Hollow. A dozen agents entered over the course of 3 days. They found remnants of old campsites, shattered bottles, rusted tools. But on the 3rd day, they uncovered something far more unsettling. In a rock alcove, hidden behind vines and moss, they discovered what appeared to be a crude shelter, walls made of stacked stones and tree limbs. Inside, they found remnants of clothing, some matching the brand of gear the campers wore. And on the far wall, drawn in charcoal, was the spiral triangle symbol, this time larger. Underneath, words had been scrawled in uneven handwriting. They chose the path. The path chose them back. A metallic box was buried beneath the dirt floor. Inside, dozens of faded photographs, none recent, all Polaroids, all showing groups of people, campers, hikers, couples, caught mid-laugh, mid-meal, mid-hike. All unaware, all in this same forest. Some of the photos dated back to the 1980s. The spiral symbol was etched on the back of each. These images were not trophies, they were warnings. The FBI concluded that someone, or perhaps a group, had been operating in this region for decades. A reclusive predator? A cult? They didn't know. The findings were not made public. They feared mass panic. But quietly, several trails near Dead Hollow were closed. For restoration, signs said. Those close to the investigation knew better. The case had officially shifted from a disappearance to a serial pattern. A darkness lived in that forest, and it had been allowed to fester. Still, no sign of the 4 campers. Not yet. But Dead Hollow was no longer silent. Local authorities, now fully aware of the implications, brought in behavioral profilers from Quantico. The goal, to build a psychological profile of whoever, or whatever, might be behind the disappearances. The photographs suggested premeditation, surveillance, and a familiarity with the terrain that bordered on obsessive. Whoever had taken them knew when to strike, how to avoid detection, and exactly where to vanish afterward. The spiral triangle symbol suggested ritual or purpose, not randomness. Yet the FBI couldn't agree on a motive. Was it a reclusive serial predator? A hermit turned dangerous? A cult operating off-grid? One profiler, Agent Ramirez, raised a different theory. What if it's generational, she asked. What if we're looking at a lineage, passed down knowledge of the land, of the caves, of the way to move unseen? The unsettling part was, it fit. Meanwhile, Sierra's parents refused to leave the search base. They began their own campaign, distributing flyers beyond Utah, pushing the story into national attention. Social media exploded with theories. YouTubers dissected every clue, every photo. Reddit threads sprouted with thousands of comments, many from people claiming to have seen figures in the woods or heard screams while hiking in the region. Some stories dated back years. A hiker named Paul Mercer came forward. In 2011, he had gotten lost for a night near Dead Hollow. He told investigators that he stumbled upon an odd structure deep in the woods, a circular arrangement of stones with sticks placed upright in the center, like crude totems. He'd heard whispering that night, though he was alone. When he tried to return to the spot in daylight, he never found it again. His account had been dismissed at the time. Now investigators were listening. The FBI initiated drone scans of the entire Dead Hollow perimeter. LiDAR imaging showed multiple underground cavities, some natural, others possibly man-made. A tactical team descended into one of the larger caverns. What they found stopped them cold. It was a chamber, roughly 15 feet wide. Inside, signs of occupancy, bones of small animals, an old lantern and carved symbols on the wall. But more disturbing were the 4 sleeping bags arranged in a perfect square. One bore the initials S.A. embroidered in pink. Sierra Adams. Lab tests would later confirm traces of her DNA. That meant at least some of the campers had been inside that chamber. And alive. For how long, no one could say. But the implications were devastating. Why leave the sleeping bags behind? Why set them up so neatly? Was it a message or a stage? At that point, investigators could no longer deny what they were up against. Someone had taken them, someone had held them, and someone might still be watching. Surveillance cameras were hidden around key access points to the region. The FBI hoped whoever was responsible might return to the area or had never left. Meanwhile, an independent investigator named Jonah Lee began digging through land records. What he discovered added a whole new layer to the case. A plot of land deep within the forest, just bordering Dead Hollow, had been transferred between private owners since the 1950s. Most recently, it was owned by a man named Darrell M. Bowen. No photo ID, no online presence, only a P.O. box. When authorities checked the box, it had been inactive for over 3 years. But there was a surveillance camera at the post office. The last recorded pickup had occurred exactly 3 months before the campers vanished. The man wore a broad-brimmed hat, sunglasses, and gloves, even in summer. They ran facial recognition. Nothing. No matches in any national database. Whoever this man was, he had erased himself, and now he was their only lead. Authorities now considered this a manhunt. Posters with the blurry surveillance image of the man from the post office were distributed to towns and gas stations within a 200-mile radius. They labeled him Person of Interest Number 1. But no one recognized him. No one had seen him around Dead Hollow. No fingerprints, no vehicle registration, no tax filings. It was as if he existed only in that P.O. box, and then vanished into the trees. Jonah Lee, the independent researcher, began focusing on the land owned by Darrell Bowen. Using old survey maps and state archives, he traced its boundaries and overlaid them with historical sightings of strange lights, disappearances, and unreported incidents. There was a cluster of red dots that unnerved even the FBI. 4 disappearances over the last 30 years had occurred right at the edge of that private plot. 2 hikers in 1987, a wildlife photographer in 1995, a high school student who ran away from home in 2006, all cold cases, all unsolved. All vanished within the same wooded zone. The FBI received special authorization to search the property. A tactical team entered the land at dawn. Drones scouted above. Ground teams moved slowly, marking signs of disturbed earth, unnatural piles of stone, and anything out of place. The air felt heavier in that section of forest, the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. By midday, they found a clearing. At its center was an old wooden shack, collapsed in parts but clearly lived in at some point. Inside, under rotted beams and a rusted stove, they found something that turned this case from disturbing to monstrous. A trapdoor. It led to a ladder. The ladder descended 15 feet into a chamber, part dirt, part stone, and on the walls, hand-carved markings, spirals, triangles, names, dates. One was recent, May 17th, 2022. That was the day the campers vanished. There were also items: a comb, a pink shoelace, a bracelet with beads spelling Liz. Elizabeth Ward was one of the campers. Her mother identified the bracelet immediately. It was the last gift she had given her daughter. This meant they had been brought here, alive and held. But again, no bodies, no blood, no obvious signs of death, just evidence of presence. Ghostly fingerprints of lives interrupted. One investigator, hardened from 2 decades of fieldwork, wept when he saw the bracelet. The FBI began expanding the perimeter around the shack. A canine unit sniffed out a buried plastic bin 50 yards from the structure. Inside were 3 journals, weathered, torn, but readable. The contents were horrifying. Page after page detailed the cycles of the forest, the purification rituals, the belief that the mountain speaks through silence, and entries like, 3 arrived today, vibrant, loud. They will learn quiet soon. She cries at night, beautiful music. They resist, but the forest is patient. And then fire comes soon, must finish the work. These entries were dated just before the massive forest fire that uncovered the original tent site. It became clear the fire hadn't been accidental. It had been set to destroy evidence, to end a cycle. But something went wrong. Something was left behind. Investigators now realized the person they were chasing wasn't just hiding. He believed in something twisted, something spiritual. And if he saw the forest as a living thing, he might still be within it, not running, not hiding, but watching and waiting. The FBI brought in a forensic linguist to analyze the journals. The phrasing, tone, and word choice suggested a male, educated, possibly in his late 40s to early 60s, and likely religious, though not aligned with any mainstream faith. The mention of cycles, rituals, and the reverence for the forest pointed to a cultic or solitary belief system, likely self-created. The investigators dubbed him the Keeper. They believed he saw himself not as a killer, but as a guardian, a purifier, a disciple of some natural force only he understood. The journals hinted that the campers had been kept alive for several days. The entries were specific, with descriptions of their behavior. "The red-haired one is defiant," one line read. "She will be first." Another entry: "The small one prays when she thinks I can't hear. I do." The most recent journal ended abruptly. "They are ready now. The fire comes." That was it. No more pages. The FBI believed this man was preparing some kind of final act, a ritual. But the fire had disrupted his plan. Whether he died in the blaze or escaped was still unknown. Fire crews had confirmed the fire's origin. Multiple ignition points, likely accelerant-based. It was not natural. Someone had set it. Jonah Lee's research went deeper. He found an old incident report from 1992, buried in state archives. A camper named Vincent Hale had gone missing in the same forest sector. His friend, who survived, described a man in the trees who watched them for hours before vanishing. His claims were dismissed as hallucination caused by dehydration, but the location? Exactly the same area. The FBI revisited Vincent Hale's file. He had never been found. But his mother, before passing, told a local paper that she received strange letters for years, unmarked, always typed. Filled with forest imagery and spiritual poetry, they had stopped in 2006. Now agents wondered, could Vincent Hale still be alive? Could he have become the Keeper? A man taken, then transformed, turned into something else entirely? It was a chilling theory, but it gained traction. The handwriting in the journals didn't match Vincent Hale's known records, but 20 years could change someone. And the level of detail, the symbolic language, pointed to someone who had fully immersed himself in solitude and delusion. The FBI launched a regional psychological profile campaign. They distributed composite sketches based on witness reports going back 3 decades. A reclusive man with long hair, gaunt features, deep-set eyes, a face carved by the elements. They called for public tips. Hundreds poured in. One stood out. A truck driver reported seeing a man matching the description 6 weeks earlier, walking alone, barefoot, carrying a burlap sack, near the southern ridge of the same forest. That area had not been searched. A new team mobilized. Drones were deployed. And then, on the second day, they found something. A campsite, hidden, primitive, just ashes and bones of old fires, but fresh footprints, bare, adult-sized, no shoes, no gear, just prints. And nearby, hanging from a tree, a wind chime made of old tin and string. When the wind blew, it made a haunting sound, not musical, but rhythmic, like a countdown. The agent stood in silence, realizing something chilling. He wasn't gone. He was still here, still watching, still listening, and worst of all, he might not be alone. The wind chime made of tin and string became a symbol of terror in the investigation. Agents began finding similar objects deeper in the woods, hung high in trees, all handcrafted, each slightly different. Some had carvings on the tin pieces, scratched symbols resembling stars, spirals, or rudimentary runes. They seemed to follow a pattern, as if marking territory or guiding someone through an unseen path. The team brought in a symbologist from a local university. She confirmed the symbols didn't match any known religious systems, but some bore eerie resemblance to ancient Nordic glyphs used in protection rituals and sacrificial ceremonies. It was impossible to say if the creator believed in their power or simply used them as psychological tools to confuse, to intimidate, or to worship something no one else could see. The ground near the wind chimes was often disturbed. Light footprints, no tire tracks. As if the person had danced or moved around them in circles. Ritualistic behavior, the agents believed. Something practiced, something rehearsed over years. Emotion triggered by obsession. Then, a breakthrough. A trap camera placed on a ridge-captured movement. At first, it looked like a blur, but frame-by-frame analysis showed a human figure. Tall, thin, long hair down to the shoulders, moving quickly and low to the ground. The timestamp matched the trucker's sighting window. But most disturbing was the figure's direction. It was headed not away from investigators, but toward them. The next morning, a ranger's vehicle was found vandalized, not destroyed, just altered. Pine cones stacked on the hood, all tires deflated, and the windshield wiped clean from outside, with muddy fingerprints forming a single word in reverse: listen. The message was cryptic. It rattled the agents. This wasn't a man who feared capture. This was someone who watched, waited, and decided when to reveal himself. The forest had become his game board. The campers, perhaps, just his latest pieces, or victims. The FBI changed tactics. They began rotating shifts at night, leaving decoys, monitoring known chime zones. One night, around 3:12 a.m., a motion sensor went off. Agents rushed in silently, night vision gear on. Nothing. But in place of one chime hanging low was a child's drawing, faded, torn. It showed 4 stick figures. 3 standing, 1 lying down. Above them, a smiling sun. In the corner, a figure in black scribbles. The handwriting on the back was childlike. He says they're not afraid anymore. A profiler suggested the man may have abducted children in the past, or had been a child victim himself. The drawing seemed to indicate knowledge of the camper's fate. But why only now reveal it? Then came the most terrifying clue yet. A voice. Captured on an agent's body mic, accidentally left on during a routine forest sweep. After hours of silence, a single whisper broke through, slow, rasped, right next to the device. "I showed you mercy." No footsteps, no rustle, just the voice. The agent swore he'd seen no one. Infrared scans showed no presence nearby. But the voice was there, clear, almost mournful. The sound was enhanced, isolated, and replayed dozens of times. Experts confirmed it was human, male, approximately aged 50-60. But what disturbed the most wasn't the words, it was the tone, regret, not anger, not threat, as if the speaker believed he had done something noble, that he'd saved them, or ended something for their own good. Now, the agents feared the story wasn't about catching a killer, it was about surviving his world. The weeks that followed were tense and methodical. The investigation team, now operating from a mobile command post deeper in the forest, deployed audio lures, recordings of human conversation, laughter, the clinking of camping gear, in hopes of drawing the mysterious figure out. Night after night, the woods responded only with silence. Then, on a fog-drenched morning, a local hiker named Brandon Colt reported finding something strange near a dried-out creek bed 3 miles from the original campsite. It was a canvas tarp, weathered and camouflaged, draped over what looked like an entrance into the earth. Beneath it, a tunnel, narrow, crude, dug by hand. The agents descended with caution, flashlights sweeping the damp interior. The smell hit them first, earth, rot, and something else, metallic and old. Along the tunnel walls were etchings, dozens, names, some incomplete, others scratched out. One of the names was familiar, Eliza G. It matched a girl who had vanished in 1998 during a solo camping trip, never found. A cold case file long forgotten. Another name matched a missing hiker from 2003. It became apparent that this place wasn't just connected to the 4 campers. It was a shrine of past victims, a museum of memory created by a mind unwell, or a collector. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber carved crudely into the rock. In its center, a chair, wooden, cracked, facing the wall. Chains hung from its arms, loose, rusted. It wasn't a prison, it was a stage. In front of it, a pile of small items, shoelaces, a compass, a harmonica, 2 broken watches, all catalogued and matched to previous unsolved disappearances. Not just from Utah, but from other nearby national parks. This was bigger than anyone had realized, a serial pattern disguised by geography and years. As agents processed the site, one of them noticed a section of the wall that sounded hollow. Behind it, a false panel. Behind the panel, a box. Inside the box, photographs, not digital, film, grainy, all taken in the woods, all of campers. Some appeared candid, laughing by a fire, hiking, drinking from streams. Others posed, staring directly into the lens. Blank expressions. The final photo in the box showed the 4 missing campers, Daniel, Rosa, Leah, and Sam. They were standing beside their tent, smiling. The timestamp was dated 3 days after they were reported missing. The horror sank in immediately. This meant they were alive, for at least some time, after the tent was discovered, which also meant someone else had removed their gear, staged the site, and stayed to watch the investigation unfold. It was an act of manipulation, psychological control. A cat-and-mouse game more elaborate than any of them had expected. The tunnel was sealed off, samples taken. DNA analysis would take weeks. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the work of an opportunistic killer. It was ritualized, practiced, personal. The images told a story, and whoever took them wanted someone to eventually find it, as if the story mattered more than the crime itself. That same day, investigators discovered another chilling detail. A spiral symbol, identical to the ones found on the wind chimes, had been carved into the bark of a tree directly above the tunnel entrance. fresh, still wet. It hadn't been there days before, meaning the person responsible was watching again, perhaps watching now. Night patrols increased. Agents began reporting the feeling of being followed. Strange markings appeared near the mobile command unit. A rabbit skull, arranged stones in circles, twine tied to trees in silent patterns. It was a haunting message, repeated without words. You are not alone here. And then, one night, a fire started. The fire began just before midnight. A faint orange glow flickered through the trees near the base of Pine Ridge, no more than 2 miles from the abandoned tent. At first, it was mistaken for a campfire, an unauthorized hiker maybe. But within minutes, the flames surged, devouring dry brush and pine needles, licking up tree trunks like kindling soaked in gasoline. Rangers and agents scrambled from their sleeping quarters, radios crackling in panic as wind carried embers further into the forest. By dawn, over 800 acres were burning. The fire moved fast, too fast. Satellite imagery later showed that multiple ignition points had been set almost simultaneously, pointing to arson. Whoever started it knew the terrain and the wind. They had timed it perfectly, but the fire did more than destroy. As flames consumed the trees, they also exposed the hidden. Near the western edge of the blaze, firefighters discovered a second site, not a camp, a dumping ground. Beneath a charred pine, barely protected by a melted tarp, were bones, human, scattered, buried in shallow dirt, as if someone hadn't finished the job. Investigators arrived as soon as the flames retreated. Forensic teams set up a perimeter while helicopters dumped water overhead. The remains, though badly damaged, were examined on site. There were 4 skulls, 4 distinct skeletons. Initial reports confirmed they were recent. One still had braided hair, another wore a friendship bracelet. The coroner later verified the devastating truth. They were the missing campers, Daniel, Rosa, Leah, and Sam. The discovery should have brought closure. It didn't. If anything, it only deepened the mystery. The bodies had been there before the fire. The arsonist didn't burn the forest to hide them. He burned it to reveal them. It was a message, an announcement, a final act in a dark performance. The case exploded in national media. Utah campground serial killer, the headlines read. But authorities resisted the label. There was still no suspect, no motive, no known connections. But the fire had unlocked more than just bones. In a nearby clearing, under a scorched stump, agents discovered a metal box, fireproof and half-buried. Inside, a notebook. Leather-bound, the first page read, in jagged handwriting, "I waited for them to see." Each page after that contained fragmented entries, observations, dates, descriptions of campers, symbols, coordinates. It wasn't a confession. It was a journal of stalking, of watching, of waiting. Most entries ended with the same symbol, the spiral. Pages were dated as far back as 1996. The author claimed he had protected the land from those who disrespected it, that the campers didn't listen, that they left trash, noise, fire, that they had to be taught. It was the writing of someone who believed he was part of the forest, a guardian twisted by delusion and obsession. But the notebook offered no name, no photo, no clear identity, only a code, YBR 1973. Analysts tried to trace it. They cross-referenced park ranger records, military files, permit applications. One name came up repeatedly, a former seasonal worker named Eli Barnes, who'd worked at several parks in the early 2000s, then vanished. No forwarding address, no bank activity, nothing, a ghost in the system. But the age fit, so did the profile. And then a breakthrough. A partial fingerprint recovered from the notebook's inner cover matched an old application file from 2001. It was him, Eli Barnes. a man who had once been entrusted to protect nature and had used that role to observe, stalk, and ultimately kill. But where was he now? The forensic team returned the following morning under clearer skies, equipped with stronger lighting, fresh batteries, thermal imaging devices, and an expanded perimeter grid to sweep the forest floor inch by inch. Despite the unease that clung to the site, no one spoke of it directly. The mood among the team was unusually hushed. Even the experienced field technicians who'd seen dozens of crime scenes seemed rattled. They weren't sure why. Nothing about the tent itself should have been terrifying, but it was. Maybe it was the unnatural stillness of the area, or the way the birds never sang. Maybe it was the way the sunlight refused to break through the canopy, as if nature itself didn't want to illuminate what had happened here. They restarted the search from the tent, moving outward in a starburst pattern. About 50 yards to the north, a young investigator named Danica found something strange buried beneath a layer of old pine needles. It was a small stack of Polaroids, weathered but surprisingly intact, kept safe inside a Ziploc bag. The photos were faded but unmistakably chilling. They showed the 4 campers looking nervous and huddled together. In each photo, their eyes were red, either from the camera flash or something else. Behind them, in the background, were dense trees. But one photo showed what appeared to be a 5th figure, barely visible, lurking several feet behind them. When the image was zoomed and enhanced, the figure looked humanoid, but distorted. A dark silhouette, no face, no details, just presence. The team grew quiet as they passed the photos around. Did someone follow them? A ranger whispered. Danica turned over the Ziploc. On the back was scrawled a single sentence in smeared black marker. We saw it again. The word again shook the group more than they cared to admit. It suggested the campers had seen something before, something they couldn't explain, something they feared would return. The theory forming among the team wasn't entirely rational, but it gripped them all the same. What if the campers hadn't simply gotten lost? What if something had been hunting them? The psychological profiler brought in to assist the team, Dr. Rowan, reviewed the photos and noted that the body language of the campers suggested increasing distress, especially Chloe and Liam, who appeared to be clinging to one another tightly in the last image. These kids weren't posing for fun, she said. These are not vacation photos. These are records. One ranger returned to the tent and noticed something previously overlooked. A short, handwritten note tucked into a sleeping bag liner. It was written in rushed, panicked scrawl. Don't trust the ranger. He's not who he says he is. Stay awake. Don't go into the trees. That one sentence turned the investigation upside down. All assumptions were back on the table. Had someone impersonated a ranger? Was the threat not supernatural, but human and cunning? A forest ranger's uniform would allow someone to gain trust, redirect search parties, mislead the public. If a predator had used that cover, the implications were horrifying. Now the team was combing through ranger logs, photos, visitor interviews, and incident reports from that time. The deeper they dug, the more they found gaps. Shift swaps not documented, logs with missing signatures, and one ranger in particular whose record was vague, a man listed only as G. Nolan, no background check, no address, no forwarding contact. He appeared in the logs for only 3 days, June 11th to 13, 1998, the exact window when the campers vanished. Then he was gone. No one remembered hiring him. No one recalled working alongside him. And yet his name was there, neatly written, just enough to look official. The team had stumbled onto something far darker than they'd anticipated. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a blueprint of deception. And the forest, quiet as ever, had been keeping its secrets well hidden. Until now. The arrival of the forensic anthropologist team marked a shift in the pace and precision of the investigation. Unlike the search teams or local police, these specialists moved methodically, with every step calculated, every square inch of the site catalogued. The base of operations had become more than just a tent and a few folding tables. It was now a makeshift forensic lab in the middle of the Utah wilderness. Dr. Andrea Keller, a veteran in field recoveries, took the lead. Her presence immediately shifted the tone. She wasn't here for theories. She was here for facts. She studied the charred edges of the map fragment, the knife marks on the wooden handle, the soil samples beneath the disturbed earth. And then she turned her attention to the tent itself. Though abandoned for years, the canvas walls had preserved certain elements from exposure: faint blood splatter patterns, partial footprints under the tent flap, and even a few preserved strands of hair caught in the zipper. As each sample was collected and logged, Dr. Keller noted something deeply unsettling. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of an attack inside the tent. It was as if the campers had simply vanished in the middle of routine. That made no sense. People don't just walk away from an active campsite, leaving food uneaten and journals half-written, especially not all four. A breakthrough came 2 days later when one of the soil samples yielded something unexpected, a small trace of an uncommon metallic compound, bismuth telluride, used primarily in advanced thermal insulation and occasionally in military-grade electronics. It was the kind of detail that meant nothing to a layperson but rang alarm bells for Dr. Keller. This wasn't something you find randomly in a state park. Someone, or something, had been there carrying that material. Her report was submitted quietly, bypassing local law enforcement and sent directly to a federal contact in Salt Lake City. Within 48 hours, the investigation's jurisdiction shifted. Officially, it was to aid in multi-agency coordination. Unofficially, it meant something darker had been unearthed. The arrival of federal agents wasn't subtle. Dark SUVs rolled up the narrow service road, their tires kicking up dust in silence. They brought their own equipment, their own protocols, and most importantly, their own silence. Dr. Keller was politely thanked and removed from the site, her samples taken into federal custody. She left with a heavy heart and more questions than answers. Meanwhile, the families were notified that new developments had emerged, but no further details were provided. The press, once buzzing with theories and headlines, was now met with a wall of no comment. But a local journalist named Lucas Pierce wasn't buying the official line. A tenacious reporter with a history of ruffling feathers, Lucas had covered the original Disappearance back in 2007. Now, 18 years later, he was back, with notebooks full of unanswered questions, and an instinct that something about this recovery didn't sit right. He wasn't alone in that feeling. Back in town, whispers started to circulate. Locals spoke of military activity near the ridge. Strange lights seen in the trees late at night, unmarked helicopters. One hunter claimed he was told to vacate a section of public land by men without uniforms, but with badges. Lucas began to piece together timelines, cross-referencing sightings with the dates of the federal arrival. The overlap was too perfect to be coincidence, but the question remained: what had really been found near that tent? The tent was abandoned, yes. But was it the only thing left behind? And why were the feds so interested in a missing person case that had been dormant for nearly 2 decades? What was the real story hidden in the red rock soil of Utah? The truth was starting to feel less like a mystery and more like a cover-up. Lucas Pierce wasn't the kind of journalist to back off when doors started closing. If anything, it only fueled him. With local officials suddenly unavailable and federal agents replacing the entire investigative team, he realized the usual methods wouldn't work. So he did what any stubborn reporter with a gut feeling would do. He went straight to the source. One evening, just before sunset, he hiked out to the edge of the restricted zone with a long lens camera and a handheld audio recorder. He wasn't planning to cross the tape, not yet, but he wanted to see who was really out there. From a ridge about a quarter-mile from the site, Lucas spotted what he expected: black vehicles, portable towers, and men with tactical gear. But he also saw something he didn't expect: two large crates being airlifted out by helicopter, their sides stenciled with a marking he didn't recognize. The area wasn't just being investigated, it was being cleared. He zoomed in and snapped photos, documenting the movement before quietly backing away. That night, he published a vague but pointed blog post titled "Who's Digging in the Desert?" Within hours, it was picked up by a small but active subreddit dedicated to missing person cold cases. The comments exploded with speculation, some absurd, some chillingly plausible. One commenter mentioned a similar case in Nevada involving a sealed report and a vanishing hiker. Another spoke of patterns in park disappearances going back decades. Lucas found himself in the middle of something bigger than he anticipated. Meanwhile, in the nearby town of Moab, an old man named George Clifton was watching the news from his recliner. The story triggered a memory he'd buried for years: a hunting trip gone wrong in 1987, just miles from the site. Back then, he and his brother had come across a strange outpost deep in the forest. It looked abandoned, but had signs of recent activity: footprints in the dust, equipment stowed under camo netting, and, most disturbing, a chain of children's drawings pinned to a tree, fluttering in the wind. They hadn't told anyone. Who would believe them? But now, seeing the story surface again, George felt the weight of silence. He called the local news tip line and left a cryptic message: "You're digging in the wrong place." It started long before those campers disappeared. Lucas got wind of the call and tracked George down the next day. At first, George was hesitant, but after some coaxing, he agreed to show Lucas the old location, if only to get it off his chest before his memory faded completely. The next morning, they drove out in George's rusted pickup, navigating forgotten fire roads and washed-out trails until they reached a clearing. Everything was overgrown now, but Lucas saw it. Shallow depressions where equipment might have stood, rusted wires buried in the soil, and one remaining artifact: a rusted metal plate half buried in the earth, with only one word visible: "Observer." Lucas photographed everything, and though he didn't know what it meant yet, he knew it mattered. When he returned to town, he received an unmarked envelope slid under his motel door. Inside was a printed map with a single red dot near the canyon's edge, and a note: "Not all who disappear are taken by accident." There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it. But Lucas felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He looked out the window, scanning the parking lot, the tree line, the rooftops. Someone was watching, and whoever it was, they didn't want the truth buried any longer. The investigation reached a fever pitch as forensic analysts processed the tattered notebook and its cryptic contents. Authorities released nothing to the public, but within the task force, the atmosphere was tense, electric. The symbols sketched throughout the pages didn't match any standard cartographic markers, nor were they tied to known landmarks. Yet they were repeated enough to suggest intention. Alongside them were coordinates, most of them leading to seemingly random spots deep within the forest, far from any trail system. When the team followed one set of coordinates, what they found stunned them. Hidden beneath a pile of brush and stone was a plastic container, weather-worn and sealed with duct tape. Inside was a handful of Polaroid photos, water-damaged but partially intact. The images depicted what appeared to be campfires at night, shadows barely visible beyond the flames. In one photo, a blurry figure stood at the edge of the light, watching. There was no face, just a silhouette. Even the agents accustomed to grim cases felt a chill. When they examined the container further, they found a strip of torn fabric matching a shirt, once worn by one of the missing campers, based on earlier footage and family descriptions. The discovery reignited public interest, and suddenly Utah was at the center of national headlines. Journalists descended on the small town near the forest border, eager for soundbites, but authorities held firm, unwilling to leak anything that might hinder the delicate progress. Inside the investigation room, they built a massive board. Photos, maps, strings connecting campsites, symbols, times, witness statements. The map now resembled something between a detective's war room and a conspiracy theorist's lair, but one pattern kept repeating. Every major discovery aligned with a full moon. Every date from the journal, every strange incident reported by hikers, and even the original disappearance, each had occurred during a full moon cycle. One officer, skeptical but curious, brought in a specialist in behavioral profiling. The profiler proposed a disturbing theory. If the journal was genuine, the person who left it wasn't just watching the campers, he was documenting them, stalking them for months before they vanished. The notes weren't random. They were trophies, observations, rituals even. This wasn't just a disappearance, it was an orchestrated removal, a predator in sync with nature's cycle. The forest, he said, wasn't just a hiding place, it was the stage. With that, authorities refocused their search on nights surrounding the next full moon. They doubled surveillance, set up trail cams, and deployed drones with infrared capabilities. Deep in the woods, something was happening. The forest was stirring again, and whatever secrets it had buried, it seemed unwilling to stay silent much longer. That night, as the moon crept over the treetops, casting long shadows across the cold terrain, one of the motion-activated cameras triggered. A figure appeared briefly, barely a blur, but it was real, human. Watching, waiting, the image sent shockwaves through the team. After nearly 2 decades, they were closer than ever to finding out who or what had been hiding in the forest all along. As the grainy image of the figure circulated among the task force, tension rose like fog through the trees. Analysts enhanced the frame repeatedly, but no matter how much they tried, the result remained the same. A human shape, tall and lean, standing just outside the ring of trees where the infrared camera had been mounted. There was no face, no color, no movement, only presence, and that was enough to set every alarm off. A decision was made. At dawn, a specialized team equipped with night vision, thermal gear, and GPS trackers would hike to the exact location the figure had appeared. They hoped it was just a coincidence, a hunter perhaps, or someone who didn't realize he'd wandered into a restricted area. But no one voiced what everyone feared, that the person in the photo wasn't random at all. That maybe, just maybe, he'd been watching long before the camera had ever been placed. As the team entered the dense woods at daybreak, the forest was silent. The wind didn't blow, the birds didn't sing. It was as if the land was holding its breath. The deeper they walked, the more twisted the trees became, gnarled trunks, branches like arms reaching for something unseen, and moss so thick it looked like it had swallowed the ground. Hours passed. Then they saw it. A small clearing up ahead with what looked like a disturbed patch of earth. At first glance, it seemed like an animal burrow, but as they moved closer, one of the officers recognized the shape of a backpack strap half buried under the dirt. They unearthed it slowly, methodically. Inside the pack was a water-damaged journal, almost identical in handwriting to the one found near the tent. But this one was newer, more intact. And it wasn't about the girls, it was about the search team. Pages filled with chillingly accurate descriptions. Man with red beard arrived Tuesday. Tall man scans perimeter regularly. 2 women stay near tent, rarely wander far. They froze. Whoever wrote this had been watching them for days. One page, dated just 3 nights prior, ended with a line that sent a chill through everyone's bones. I wonder if they'll find the 3rd spot. I wonder what they'll do when they realize I've been right behind them all along. No one spoke. No one needed to. The mission had changed. This wasn't about solving an old mystery anymore. This was a live threat. They radioed base, demanding an immediate extraction. But interference crackled across the line. No signal. One of the agents climbed a ridge to gain a better angle. He held up the device and took a step forward, only to find, carved deep into the bark of a tree beside him, a fresh message: "You're not the only ones hunting." Panic spread like wildfire. The forest was no longer just a crime scene. It was a trap, and they had just stepped into its center. The moment they realized the message was fresh, carved no more than a few hours ago, the atmosphere shifted from investigative tension to raw fear. The seasoned agents, some of whom had served in war zones, looked at each other with wide eyes and clenched jaws. The message, "You're not the only ones hunting," wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. Whoever they were dealing with wasn't hiding anymore. He was playing. One of the agents, Ramirez, snapped photos of the carving while the others circled around, forming a tighter perimeter. Every shadow suddenly felt alive. Every snapping twig made hearts pound. They had planned for a recovery operation, not a manhunt, and certainly not for a predator who was hunting them back. They moved quickly down the ridge, retracing their steps to regroup at the last marked waypoint. But when they arrived, they found something that hadn't been there before. A pile of carefully arranged rocks in the shape of an arrow pointing deeper into the woods. It wasn't on any map, and it wasn't there that morning. Someone was guiding them, or leading them into a trap. Against protocol, the lead officer made a call. "We follow the arrow." They hiked single file, weapons drawn, ears tuned to every sound. The trail became narrower. The trees pressed in like walls. Then the path opened into another clearing, this one unnaturally perfect, a circular space where the grass had been flattened, like something had laid there for weeks. In the center was a single object, a Polaroid photo pinned to a stick. They approached cautiously. The image showed the original tent from the outside, taken at night. But the most disturbing part was the faint outline of 4 figures inside. 4 campers. But they had only ever known of 3 girls who disappeared. The 4th shape was taller, broader, standing behind the others, as if watching them, as if he had always been there. One of the agents dropped to his knees, scanning the photo for any landmarks they could use. Another flipped it over. On the back, in blocky handwriting, it said, "You missed the first time. Will you miss again?" That's when they heard it. A distant voice echoing through the trees, not quite shouting, not quite speaking, almost like a chant. The words weren't clear, but the tone sent a primal shiver down their spines. They froze, trying to pinpoint the direction. It came again, closer this time. Not one voice, 3, whispering. The team backed out slowly, covering each other, but someone wasn't moving. Ramirez was gone. 1 second he was standing, the next vanished, without a sound. They searched frantically, calling his name, tracing every direction, but all they found, half buried where he had been, was another photo. This time of them, taken from behind, taken just minutes ago. The time for clues was over. The game had changed. They didn't speak as they hiked back toward the temporary base. There was nothing to say. Ramirez was gone, taken right under their noses, and whoever had done it was watching them closely enough to snap photos in real time. The team, once methodical and confident, was now fractured and paranoid. The forest no longer felt like terrain. It felt like a living trap, bending around them with silent judgment. At the mobile command post, news of Ramirez's disappearance was met with disbelief and terror. Reinforcements were called in, but a storm was rolling in fast, threatening to cut communications and delay backup. The lead investigator, Collins, sat in the dim light of the command trailer staring at the photos. He had seen a lot in his career, abductions, cult cases, deep woods disappearances, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the vanishing, it was the precision. The psychological warfare. Whoever this was had been living in these woods for decades, perhaps even blending in as a park worker, ranger, or local. A new theory began to take shape, wild but not impossible. What if the disappearances weren't random? What if someone had been selecting victims all along, tracking groups that fit a specific profile? Campers, isolated, female, vulnerable. He pulled up the old ranger rosters and started cross-referencing names with people who had been in the area during the original disappearance. One name popped up, flagged twice by internal park complaints, but never fully investigated. The man had retired suddenly 2 weeks after the girls vanished. His file was thin, too thin, no current address, a former military background. He had once taught survival training, and he owned property, off-grid, only 5 miles from the current search zone. That location had never been searched. Collins felt a cold certainty grow in his chest. A small team was quickly assembled, just 4 agents. The storm would hit in under an hour, but they couldn't wait. Every minute they delayed gave the suspect time to move, or worse. They drove partway up a rugged service road, then hiked the rest. The cabin was hard to spot. It was built low, nearly flush with the forest floor, camouflaged with bark and moss. No smoke, no sound, but the front door was ajar. Guns raised, they approached silently, hearts pounding. Collins signaled to breach. The inside was dark, reeking of rot and dampness. Stacks of old ranger uniforms, gas masks, boots, dozens of maps marked with red circles and pinned to the wall. Photos of campers, some from the original disappearance, others more recent. Some looked like surveillance shots, others like trophies. In a back room they found a hatch leading underground. A hand-carved ladder dropped into blackness. The air was thick and sour. Collins descended first. The tunnel was narrow and curved into a single room. At the center, a steel door. Locked. Scratched into the metal were the words, "Don't open unless you're ready to see." They hesitated. Then Collins turned the handle. The door creaked open with a guttural groan, and the flashlight beams cut into the darkness like knives. What they found inside didn't make sense at first. It was a room, hand-dug, claustrophobic, walls reinforced with scrap metal and wood. On the floor were 3 worn-out camping mattresses, a rusted bucket in the corner, and a string of children's fairy lights powered by an old car battery. The air was thick with mildew and time, but what caught their attention was the wall, a massive collage of newspaper clippings, Polaroid photographs, handwritten notes, and sketches. At the center, in bold red letters painted over the collage, was a single sentence: "I kept them safe." Collins's hand shook as he scanned the wall. It told a story, not just of the 3 girls, but of dozens more. Victims who had never been reported. Cases that had been ruled as accidents, misidentifications, hikers lost to nature. The man, whoever he was, hadn't just been watching. He had been collecting. Some of the Polaroids showed terrified faces. Others, smiling calm as if unaware of their fate. One of the agents opened a steel cabinet bolted to the ground. Inside were rows of old VHS tapes, each labeled with a date, each matching a disappearance. They were numbered. The last one was dated just a week ago. Tape number 36. As they processed the evidence, a faint sound came from behind the wall, barely audible, tapping, like fingernails on wood. The team froze. Collins followed the noise, placing his ear against the paneling. 3 slow taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. Morse code. SOS. The team worked quickly, ripping away the panel boards. Behind them, a hidden crawl space, and in it, 2 women, filthy, terrified, eyes wide from the sudden light. One of them whispered a name Collins recognized from a missing person report. She'd been gone for almost 2 years. "He said he saved us," she mumbled. "From the world, from evil. Said the woods were the only place we'd be safe." As they escorted the women out, the rain finally began to fall. The storm that had threatened to trap them now felt like a cleansing force. The cabin was sealed off. Evidence teams flooded the area. The tapes, the journals, the wall. It would all take years to catalogue. And the man, still gone. No trace, no body. Just a hollow in the woods where something unspeakable had lived for decades. The final report would classify him as a suspected serial abductor and murderer, but to the families of the missing, he would remain something else entirely, a ghost in the forest. The Smoky Mountains, once a place of peace and beauty, now carried a scar that time would never fully heal. For 3 families, the mystery had finally ended, but for others, it was only the beginning of new questions. Who else was out there? And who else might be watching?